Joining us right now on set to talk about everything from Washington to Wall Street is former Treasury Secretary Jack Lew. He's also a former OMB director and currently a professor at Columbia University. And, Jack, I was going to start with, maybe we talk some of the trade talks, some of the other things, but we've already gotten into it here in the commercial break.
We balanced the budget. How long did that take?
Let's just go straight to it. What are the problems we have right now with the debt and the deficit, and how do we get our arms around it?
Look, the problem we have is we're on an unsustainable path in terms of the deficit and the debt, and the bill that's working its way through Congress makes it much worse. You can have a debate as to whether you're adding $3 or $6 trillion to the debt. Whichever end you're at, it's too much.
Well, Republicans they're not at 3 to 6. They're talking about growth. And that's what we were talking about with you. We need to raise taxes in your view. And I said, well, then we won't get the growth that we need. But you said it all comes down to Social Security.
No, I think what you need to do is start with not making the problem worse. There's tax cuts that are being added, not just extended.
You mean the tips and the things like that?
Well, a host of things. Business tax cuts, state tax cuts.
Those might be good, right?
So they're not actually all showing up in the budget. They're being put in for a few years, and then there's this fiction that they're going to go away. Yeah, but we all know that sunsets never come to tax cuts. So that's why these bigger numbers of the debt impact are real.
I mean, just looking at it, though, are you now in favor of just extending the tax cuts from 2017 and making those permanent?
I would go and pick and choose amongst them as to what are most essential. I don't think that the notion that was done in 2017 should be in place for all time is correct. I understand the concern people have that this wouldn't be a great time to raise taxes. It's not a good time to cut taxes.
Always a good time, Jack.
It's not a good time to cut taxes.
No,
and this bill cuts taxes. So this is making the problem worse.
It seems like it would be political suicide for anybody, Democrat or Republican, to say we're just going to let these cuts expire and face a huge tax increase on American families across the board.
If the debate in January, and I have a piece running in Bloomberg this morning where I make this case, if the debate this year had started out, how do we deal with a deficit that's out of control and a debt that's out of control? You could have started with the building blocks. How do you not make the problem worse? Instead, there's a pile-on of new tax cuts
we need to go back to the Biden administration to start then, Jack, obviously.
Well, I think we could have a debate over...
Okay, but we are here either way. And you're talking $3 trillion. Okay, we're at 37.
Yeah.
My question to you is, what do you want to do with, I mean, you don't want to cut spending. I don't think Democrats ever do. But what do you do on the revenue side? Where do you want to raise taxes to balance the budget? You did it with Clinton, right, with the OMB. You were OMB director. How do you do it again? Where do you get the revenue?
Look, you start by not making it worse. You don't add to the problem. And
well, then we've got to go back to 2020, Jack. And that was my point.
You don't pretend that you're paying for it when you're not. And you don't pay for part of it by taking health and nutrition benefits away from the most vulnerable in society.
But, Jack, we were at $700 billion before the pandemic was the deficit with Trump in the first term. We got to $2 trillion under Biden, even though the pandemic was over, and we're still at $2 trillion. So, I know you just want to come and just say, you don't dig where you keep it in. It's Trump's fault. It's $3 billion and all that.
Trillion.
$3 trillion, sorry. $3 trillion. But we know. But everybody's guilty. Yeah. Biden was guilty. There were $2 trillion deficits one year after another with him. What do we do, in your view? Where do we raise taxes and without hurting growth to get it done?
I think that you start by asking, what are we going to have to do? We all know Social Security is going to need some reforms to remain well-funded for the next generation.
Right.
I was part of the 1983 Social Security reforms. It was hard. It took bipartisan cooperation to do things that were hard but reasonable. You start by having a bipartisan conversation. You'll never do that with one side doing it to the other. Hard decisions are made in bipartisan.
Would it be raising the age to 70 or means testing? Or?
I'm not going to sit here and negotiate what a package would look like. But if you want to know where you raise revenues, one of the places you raise revenues is to pay for Social Security. That would reduce the deficit also.
How about the high end? Raise the high end? Yeah. You got to go to you got to broaden the base and get a lot of the middle. You need to raise taxes, right?
I think that most Americans, if they face the reality that Social Security is 70% funded going into the future, would say, we got to do something to make it 100% funded. And then you do a mixture of things that don't. In 1983, the changes did not changed the quality of life for people dramatically, but it filled a hole for over 50 years. You know, that's something, 50 years is a long time.
So you would raise capital gains taxes?
I go back to where I started. I would start by not making things worse right now. You keep asking me what would I do to get better. I'm worried that this bill going through Congress will make the problem worse, and it puts the burden on people. 16 million people losing health care is a big deal.
We're getting different health care.
No, you know, you say getting different health care, but if you take away Medicaid or if you take away a premium tax credit for the ACA, most of those people aren't going to afford it.
You wouldn't take away any of the 7 million prime working age healthy adults that get Medicaid. You wouldn't try to transition them to work or off of Medicaid?
Employers have taken advantage of this, too, by not offering health care.
If employers provided health care to all these workers, you wouldn't have had 20 million uncovered.
And that's what the Republicans have said. Even a Republican we had on today, a Republican senator today, said let the employers pick up some of these.
I would be delighted if everyone had employer coverage.
That would actually do this.
They don't.
You know, Secretary Lew, just looking back, the national debt, when you were secretary, went from $16.7 trillion to $19.9 trillion. That's an over $3 trillion increase. I mean, that's what Perplexity tells me. Is that the case, and what happened? That was a $3 trillion increase over the time of your tenure.
Look, the arithmetic is simple. Whenever there's a deficit, you're going to be increasing the national debt. So your annual, when you make a budget, there's only, you know, a couple of variables. You have revenue, you have spending, and what's left over, you got to borrow.
We should have stopped digging then.
That's why I'm saying
we should have stopped back then, not just now.
We were engaged in a serious bipartisan negotiation where we were prepared to do hard things. Both sides were prepared to do hard things.
About
with the grand bargain negotiation.
Yeah, but why didn't President Obama make that a binding vote?
It didn't. Simpson Bowles wasn't the negotiation. The negotiation was a grand bargain with Obama and Boehner, and it got close. It didn't come together because there was just a need for more revenue than they could have Republicans accept, and they were demanding more tax cuts, more spending cuts than Democrats would vote for. If that could have been brought into balance, we would have had a deal.
So where do you see, I guess, the seeds for that in Washington today? It seems to me like it's gotten tougher.
I think there are very few C's, and the reason that I'm reminding people that we've got a big problem and the only way to deal with it ultimately as a serious conversation is to slow down before you make it worse, because it only gets harder. At some point, there's going to be a bad event in the world, in the bond market, and people are going to say, oh my God, what do we do about it? At that moment, if the problem is $3 or $6 trillion worse, then the consequences are that much harder.
You mean we're spending like this when there's not a financial crisis?
This is not a moment when we ought to be digging such a deep hole.
Promising so much.
I'm a big believer that when the economy is in crisis, you do what you have to do. And, at the beginning of the Biden administration, it was the end of COVID. At the beginning of the Obama administration, it was the financial crisis. Frankly, we should have not put the brakes on when we did in the Obama years. If we could have kept going for a year, the economy would have grown.
We're still at the pandemic level spending instead of going back to pre-pandemic. Yeah. And you don't want to cut any spending.
Yeah, you're not hearing me say I wouldn't cut any spending.
How do we get back to pre-pandemic levels of spending?
I think the goal has to be, what can you do to achieve greater fiscal sustainability without hurting people inordinately? In the debate right now, there's this pretending going on that you take nutrition benefits away from people and it doesn't hurt. You take health insurance coverage away, it doesn't hurt. You were talking earlier this morning about rural hospitals. There will be an impact on rural hospitals if 16 million people go uninsured. It means uncompensated care goes up. It means marginal hospitals will close. It means that people will have hundreds of miles to go to get the
How were we
health
getting
care.
by at pre-pandemic levels? I don't remember this
I think
catastrophic.
You got to also take inflation.
Well, you got to take defense. Maybe you don't want to spend. Maybe you don't want defense spending. You don't want defense spending.
You're kind of confusing a bunch of things. I mean, we had a lot less people covered by health care before the Affordable Care Act. It's a good thing we have more people covered now.
I'm just talking pre-pandemic.
No, but when you take away the premium support for the Affordable Care Act, that's not pandemic legislation. That's going away and taking away part of the Affordable Care Act that's helped. There are going to be 5 to 6 million people who lose health insurance because the premium tax credits are gone.
I mean, the ACA giveth and it taketh away. It caused Medicaid to be growing at 3 times what any other entitlement has been growing at. And that's not how it was intended. And you don't even want to touch that.
You say it's not how it was intended, but from 1964, when Medicaid was created till now, there have been a bunch of decisions to change Medicaid.